Islam in the growing conflict, especially we're going to look at several different aspects of Islam, including radical Islam. And we're starting in Daniel 11, verses 40 to 43, which describes the conflict. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, and many ships. And he shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. He shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape from his hand, Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. Now, what we have going on here is in Daniel 11, let me just check something. Yeah, I'm going to back up to that. In Daniel 11, it started with Persia entering Israel from the north. Then the Greeks entered from the north. The Greek Empire split in two, and you had Seleucid to the north, Ptolemy to the south, and they fight back and forth, and Israel and Jerusalem get caught in the middle. Then Rome conquers the whole thing, and what you see in red there is the Roman Empire, and then the Roman Empire breaks apart, and the northern part goes Christian, and the southern part goes Islamic, and there are three conflicts. We have the Crusades, the time of the Crusades, and even before that, but up through the Crusades. The Ottomans is the second one, and the time of the end with radical Islam is the third one. And Daniel always meant exactly what he said. So when he's talking about the north, papal-led Christianity came in from the north. The Pope calls for the Crusades because they were afraid of the spread of Islam. The military powers of Europe backed him up. During the Ottoman conflict, the European powers backed him up again, and this time the Holy League. So it was always papal north, and Islam had come from the south. Well, let's take a look at some of the things here. Notice the area in red on this map. These are the areas that I just got off a map on a website where Islam was claiming to be in control. Actually, some of those countries, like across there in Central Africa, Nigeria and others, they would debate that. But there's large numbers of Muslims in that area. Notice, after 14 centuries of conflict, Islam is predominantly to the south and Christianity predominantly north. Now you notice I have Turkey red and yellow. The reason, Turkey's politically aligned with NATO, religiously aligned with the Muslim world. They've got both aspects going on there, all right? And makes it kind of interesting at times in recent years. By the way, Iran says that if they ever get in a fight with the United States, one of the first things they're going to do is send missiles into Turkey. Why? Because NATO has a bunch of communications and radar and all the rest of it there. And so things aren't always as neat as you might think they are around the world. Charles Malik was a Lebanese man. He was born in an Orthodox Christian family. He became president of the UN for a year, president of the General Assembly of the UN. He was also the Lebanese ambassador to the United States for a while, and he was a guest lecturer at Harvard. During his lecture at Harvard, this guy says the following: the only hope for the Western world lies in an alliance between the Roman Catholic Church, which is the most commonly influential, controlling, unifying element in Europe, and the Eastern Orthodox Church. Rome must unite with Eastern Orthodoxy because the Eastern Orthodox Church controls the Western Middle East. And if they don't solidify that control, Islam will march across Europe. Islam is political. The only hope of the Western world lies in a united Europe under the control of the Pope. I want you to notice he's Orthodox Christian. He just threw the Orthodox Church under the control of Rome. Well, there's been a long dispute over that one between East and West Christianity. But he's just quite willing to throw it under the control of Rome. Why? He was afraid that he saw some changes happening in Islam, and Islam was about to become violent again, he thought. At least part of it. All right? And here's what he's really talking about. Back during the time of the expansion of the Ottoman Islamic Empire, they were coming up around and they come up against Constantinople. And Western Christianity looks on and says, we don't like Eastern Christianity. Let's just see what happens. Eastern Christianity falls. Turkey kept coming. The Ottomans. And all of a sudden, Western Christianity was really in trouble. This guy is saying, hey, based on history, maybe we ought to get together early this time. That's basically what he's saying. Then he says this, and then all Protestant Christians around the globe must come into submission to the Pope, so we will have a unified Christian world. And just remember, in case you're new here, on our second presentation, we looked at the papacy as the leader of the Christian world. Not that it was all that good, but the idea is in Bible prophecy that all the world would end up following papal-led Christianity. And here's a world politician saying, oh, by the way, all the world needs to follow the Pope because we're afraid of Islam, which was the same reason they followed him at the time of the Crusades and at the Ottomans. We're in the third round of it, the same thing. Now, we have North and South. By the way, if you go to the North Pole or the South Pole, they're both cold, white places, right? They're polar opposites, but they're a lot alike. The papacy tries to put themselves in place of Christ, in many ways damaging the ministry of Christ. Most of Islam denies the divinity of Christ, changes the story of Christ again. Persecuting the saints. Take a look at this. The king of the north, well, they killed Jews, Muslims, and Christians who disagreed with him. The papacy did, all right? But there have been forms of Islam that have killed Jews, Christians, and Muslims who disagreed with him. There's some similarities there, aren't there? Then Rome, the papacy gets the capital of Rome, the dragon seat or capital, the capital of Rome. Well, how many capitals did Rome have? 2. Who got the other one? The Ottoman Islamic Empire. King of the North gets one capital, King of the South gets the other one. Isn't that interesting? Time prophecies for both. In the back of my book, one of the appendix, it shows from the 1100 through the 1930s, Christian authors from all kinds of different backgrounds that saw time periods for both Islam and Christianity. For Islam, we had the Arab phase for 150 years of expansion. Then they moved the caliphate from Medina and Mecca area over to Baghdad, and they began the decline in power. Then we have the Turks come in, and there's a guy by the name of Josiah Litch that actually predicted, based on Revelation 9 prophecy of the second woe, sixth trumpet, the time period of their power at 391 years and 15 days, based on a symbolic time prophecy there. And he said the Ottoman Empire would fall on August 11, 1840. A guy by the name of Josiah Litch. On August 11, 1840, in events that happened in Turkey, in Lebanon, and in Egypt. All the same day when it was really hard to coordinate those things. The Turkish Ottoman Empire became a protectorate of the European empires. In Daniel, whenever a current superpower becomes subservient to somebody else, they are no longer a superpower. August 11, 1840, this prophecy hits it on the nose. And he put it in print, by the way, before the event. It wasn't just like a lucky guess, I told you so after the event. Now, in Revelation 9, it says, one woe is past, behold, still 2 more woes are coming after these things. See, 1 woe is past, 2 more woes are coming. 3 woes. Daniel has 3 conflicts between the north and the south. Now, let's take a look at this. So the Arab woe, the first one, comes in, and all this area in red is what was conquered basically in that first 150 years. Now, the second one comes, well, after that 150 years, like I said, they moved the caliphate from over here over to Baghdad. And they began the decline. Then the Turks come in, they convert to Islam, and they push up, they take Constantinople, finish off the Eastern Empire, and they push on up into Western Christianity territory. That was the second woe. Why would God allow that? Oh, it's really clear. It says right in the Bible why he allows it. Here's why. But the rest of mankind who were not killed by these plagues did not repent of the works of their hands, that they should not worship demons and idols of gold, silver, brass, stone, and wood, which can neither see nor hear nor walk. And they did not repent of their murders or their sorceries or their sexual immorality or their thefts. What was going on within Christianity? They had set up images within churches and were bowing down to them. What happened in the Old Testament when God's Old Testament Israel started worshiping images? Often members of the Abrahamic family. Oh, where did Abraham come from? Ur of the Chaldees. Babylon. Then there was the Midianites and the Edomites and all the rest of them that related to the Abrahamic family. Whenever Israel started not following God's word, God would allow sections of the Abrahamic family to come in and punish them for it. God calls his people of faith, Israel, again. Hey, what do you think's going to happen if those that are claiming to follow Jesus start doing things like setting up images and worshiping them? In comes Abrahamic family, this time from Ishmael. God said that's what was going to happen. And by the way, what did Muhammad especially hate? Image worship. Do you remember what happened in Nineveh when the Islamic State came in? What happened to all those antiquities, all those images and stuff from all the different centuries and millennia and all that? They blew them up. The same thing. They didn't like it. So why is God allowing this? Well, number one, it's a woe or a punishment against Christianity for not really following the book. Something else is happening. There's a guy up here. In Christianity up here, you have to understand this whole area, papal-led Christianity, it was actually illegal to have a Bible in the common languages. You could only have it in Latin, and hardly anybody knew how to read it. No wonder they weren't living anywhere near what the Bible said. But there's this monk up here by the name of Martin Luther, who 500 years ago this fall nails the 95 Theses to the Wittenberg Chapel door, and it kicks off the Reformation. And there's unfortunately a lot of Protestants and a lot of Catholics that are planning on celebrating the end of the Reformation or the protest this fall on the 500th anniversary. But anyway, he's up here, and he kicks the Reformation in the high gear with that. What kept the Pope, who had said that was an illegal act, that was a heretical act, he translates the Bible in the common languages and tells people you don't have to go to the priest for forgiveness, you can go to God for forgiveness. Those are both things that the Pope would like to kill him for. What kept the Pope from going up here with an army and killing him? Well, you see, there was a couple of princes that supported him, which meant it actually would take an army to kill Martin Luther. But the Turks were pushing in from the south. He couldn't afford to send an army up there. He needed everybody, including those guys up there, to come down and help fight the Turks. And every time the Turks backed off for a little bit, the Pope would think about coming after Martin Luther, but the Turks would come back in again. And after a couple of rounds of this, Martin Luther figured it out. He said his greatest defender was the Sultan of Turkey. Because if it wasn't for the Sultan of Turkey, he'd have been wiped out. There's no question about it. And because of Islam pushing from the south, the Bible was translated in the common languages, and righteousness by faith in Jesus Christ was taught again. Those are good things. All right? Now, of those three woes, two are past, one would be future. Although in Revelation, the third woe is not that easily understood. It's spread out in pieces and kind of vague. However, the third conflict in Daniel 11 is not too vague. It's quite straightforward. Now, there are three conflicts here. Remember, at the appointed time he shall return and go towards the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. The second one, the appointed time, would be different. The first and the third would be similar. Well, the papacy controls Israel for a while here, and according to the prophecy, they controlled Israel for a while here. They never did during the Ottoman Empire. All right? So there's something different. Another thing is, this one is the appointed time, which means there should be a time prophecy here. Boy, when I first understood this one, I did not understand what time prophecies were here. What I'm going to do now for you for just a second is explain a time prophecy that my wife calls the graduate level. Okay? If you want a full explanation of this, show up here Saturday morning at 9. What time? 10:20. Your Sabbath school is what time? 10:30. Okay, show up here Saturday at 10:30. Good thing I checked. I had it wrong in my head. Okay, I don't have time to explain the whole thing, but it's all based on the time prophecies primarily of Daniel 12, but they're related to 11. And it says, from the abomination of desolation, there will be a time prophecy of 1290 and 1335 days for years. That would be 1290 years, 1235 or 1335 years. The abomination of desolation, there are two of them in the prophecy of Daniel. Daniel 9, it's the fall of Jerusalem, which is 70 A.D. You come 1290 years into it, it's John Wycliffe begins his work, pointing out the problems and errors within Christianity. 1335 brings you to 1405, when John Huss becomes the first practicing reformer. Wycliffe is known as the theoretician, Huss the first practicing reformer, and in that time period is the introduction to the Reformation. We get Huss, and this thing takes off. And by 1453, the Turks have taken Constantinople. All right? Now, there's a second abomination of desolation in Daniel. And that's in Daniel 11, verses 30 and 31. And from that one, it's when the papacy gets the force of arms. That happens when the French king Clovis in 508 throws his military power behind the papacy in the struggles with what were known as the barbarian tribes that were breaking up Rome. And you come 1290 years from that, it's 1798. That's the year the French general Berthier takes out the Pope's ability to persecute people. By the way, the 1290 and 1335 are supposed to bring you to a blessing. This one brings in the Bible in the common languages and righteousness by faith, trusting in God, not a priest. This one brings an end to persecution from the papacy, and 1335 brings you to 1843-44. It's kind of like a school year, but that is what we're going to look at as the time of the end, and I'll look at that one in 2 nights, all right? Then Daniel deals with that one. But both of these are good news for God's people. And this is the introduction to the time of the end. And I'll explain that one, well, in detail as well. I will explain that one on Saturday morning as well. So what do we have? The appointed time, it's like bookends. From this white line to this white line, we have the rise of the Reformation. It's strong, and then it begins the fall with the Counter-Reformation. We have the rise of Ottoman Islamic Empire. It is strong, and then it falls at the end of it. During the appointed time, the second conflict, we have the rise and fall of both the Reformation and the Ottoman Empire. During these bookends, God doesn't miss. All right? That's what I get from that one. I'll give you the detail later. Also, the papacy receives a deadly wound in 1798, but it comes back with great power. I was sitting in a hotel room 11 years ago in Houston with nothing to do one day. And I started plotting on a scrap piece of paper the dates I knew about, just a general, what I call power curve for the papal rise and fall of their power. We have their 1260 years, 1929, they come back with great power. And since 1929, concorded with Mussolini. Then John Paul comes in, and now Francis is very popular with the world press, right? The Bible says that they're going to hit their peak of power just before God sets up his kingdom, and it's going to come down to a crashing end. So far, everything's running right along the schedule with that power curve. Then I plotted the Islamic power curve on there. And it surprised me how similar they are. We have Arab Islam and the Crusades. During the Crusades, papal-led Christianity weakens them even more when they take Jerusalem. But then the Turks come back in, they're even stronger. Then they come down. And then in 1948, Israel's declared. During this time here, Islam was fighting with itself a lot. And once Israel shows up on the scene, they kind of have a common enemy that draws them together, and they become a little stronger, and they get oil money. And then radical Islam discovers terrorism. They're not the first to ever use it. Whoops. And so at this time, the world looks at radical Islam as one of the greatest threats we have to world peace today. And a lot of Muslims see radical Islam as a great threat. And based on this prophecy, the king of the south would push against the king of the north, and the king of the north would come back with great power and really decimate, especially radical Islam. All right? So I see ourselves, when we look at this one, as right here, still early beginning, but we're about to see the eradication of radical Islam. So it said, at the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him or push against him. So I'm seeing radical Islam pushing against papal-led Christianity, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind. So when I wrote a book in 2011, I said there's a day coming when radical Islam will so aggravate papal-led Christianity, even though the Pope claims to be the man of peace, he will say, we're going to have to eradicate this cancer if we're going to have peace, of radical Islam. All right? That was in 2011. Those two things have already happened. I'll show you as we go. Years ago, people were wondering, could it happen? It's in the process now. All right? Let me show you part of the reason there's almost no way to avoid a holy war in today's world. Do not think that Islam is all one group. There are many groups. Is Christianity all one group? No. We have, in general, you have Orthodox, Catholic, and you have Protestant. And Protestants all agree on everything, right? Not hardly. And so I'm just letting you know, the Muslim world has some similarities again here. We have Sunnis. Within the Sunni world, we have some radical groups. Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, the Islamic State. Especially these radical groups in particular, and to some extent beyond that, they're looking that there is going to be a war, especially in Syria. A little city of Dabiq is eventually going to play into it, and I was kind of watching as the Islamic State lost Dabiq recently. They kind of made excuses for it and said this isn't quite the time for the Battle of Dabiq yet. And they used to call their terror magazine Dabiq after the city. I'm probably saying it wrong, but anyway. Just before Dabiq fell, they changed the name of their terror magazine from Dabiq to Rome. Think about that. I'll get back to that. And so, they think there's going to be a war in Syria. They think that's the war that's already started. They believe that they will almost be destroyed, but they will be reduced to about 5,000 fighters with about 80 nations fighting against them. And then God will act miraculously for them. They will win the conflict. Jesus will help Christians convert to Islam, and anyone who doesn't agree will be put to death. And then Sunni Islam will be in charge everywhere, and the world will be at peace because it will all be Islamic. And they expect to eventually set up the world headquarters, the caliphate capital, in the city of Al-Quds. Then we have Shiite Islam. They believe there will be a war in Syria, and that they will play a major role along with people from Lebanon, Hezbollah, and that in this war they will gain power, and the 12th Imam will join with them. They will conquer the world for God. Jesus will join in and help Christians become Muslim. And they will set up the Caliphate and Al-Quds. And Jesus will destroy an Antichrist kind of guy either in Syria or Jerusalem. And both of them see it that way. Interesting, in Daniel 11, Jesus takes down the king of the north somewhere in or near Jerusalem. But very few of you know where Al-Quds is. Well, actually you do, you just don't know it. Al-Quds is Jerusalem. Uh-oh. What city gets caught in the middle in Daniel 11's prophecy? Jerusalem. Boy, does it ever. And by the way, a good chunk of the Shiites are Iranian. All right? And so we have these two different kinds, and the radicals all intend to take down the world and make them follow their form of Islam. Meanwhile, the papacy expects to someday rule the world for Christianity. Do you think there might be a problem sometime in the future? At this point, I can't see how you avoid the problem, especially since God said it's going to be there. All right? But God has a solution for it. Now, take a look at this one. Back just before the year 2000, the book Thunder of Justice was printed. It's put together by a group of Roman Catholics. It wasn't an official Roman Catholic book, but it was put together by Catholics. And it was a bunch of visions from Mary saying what was going to happen around the year 2000. And by the way, don't trust the book. Almost all of her predictions, so-called predictions from Mary, failed around the year 2000. I wouldn't trust it. But there was one that got my attention, even way back then. Now that I understood Daniel 11, I really get my attention, okay? There will be a World War III, and it will be started by a man who wears the turban of the faith, a Muslim. Yet there is a more powerful one to rise in Syria. When this one has accomplished his work, he will cause destruction and pain and great persecution. The red will flow into the sea. There will be nothing to eat. The Antichrist is going to arise from the Mohammedan race, a Muslim. Whoa. Think about this one for a moment. Has it been pretty nasty in Syria in the last several years? Yeah, over 300,000 people have gotten killed there. Oh, it's really hard to get meals in some parts of that area. All right? But look what they're doing. For many centuries now, there have been Bible scholars that have thought maybe the papacy is this end-time power. And so you have Roman Catholic representation Mary here saying, no, it's not the Catholics, it's the Muslims. All you have to do to get a holy war started is getting both sides thinking the other side's of the devil. Huh. Has papal-led Christianity ever led holy wars against Islam? Yeah. So don't be surprised about another one. He's going to have a turban. The people will call it the Eye of Satan. He will be young, wearing a long robe. Basically, I think this is 12th Imam kind of imagery. He will be very intelligent and well-equipped for nuclear war, worse than Hitler, connected with communists, fire rockets at us, and some will hit New York City. Well, 2001, those weren't rockets, but they looked like it, into the World Trade Centers. So that's kind of interesting. Now, many evangelicals are saying that the Antichrist will be Muslim. Waleed Shoebat, Joel Richardson, Joel Roosenberg, Glenn Beck, radio show host, has said this kind of stuff before. All you need to have a holy war is both sides thinking the other side's of the devil. And you're getting more and more of it. Now, what we have in Daniel 11:40-43 is a push from some form of Islam, and the U.S. and their allies counterattack and enter Israel or Palestine, and Islam is divided 3 ways. I want you to look at it again and see if you can pick the 3 ways with me. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, and many ships. He shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. By the way, that's talking about quick, short military action, all right? He shall also enter the glorious land, that's Israel, and many countries shall be overthrown. So we know many countries will be overthrown in this conflict. But these shall escape from his hand. Again, escaping from the king of the north. Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. That would be Western Jordan in today's world. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. So Egypt is one of these countries that goes down. Libya and Ethiopia, they don't go down. So we've got the groups that escape, Edom, Moab, and Ammon. Egypt and many countries are overthrown, while Libya and Ethiopia follow the king of the north. The parallel in Revelation says, and all the world followed the beast. All right, now let's take a look at a map. We have Egypt up in the northeast corner of Africa. Right there we go. Now just remember, the king of the north is both geopolitical and spiritual. He controls real territories, but he's also spiritually active all over the world. Islam comes from the south, controls real territories, but they also are spiritually active all over the world. Man, I just realized something. I'm going to come back and fix it in just a bit. And so I'm expecting, and Israel is geopolitical, it's a land, but it's also got people religiously all over the world. So Daniel is very consistent, so I must see Egypt as a literal place. I believe Egypt will radicalize and go down. Do you know where radical Islam had its start in the 1920s? Egypt. The Muslim Brotherhood there. And then, so I'm expecting Egypt to go down, but all over the world I'm expecting radicalized Islam to go down. The world will have had it, and they're going to go after them. Libya and Ethiopia, they're going to say, no. I'm expecting that they will follow the king of the north, actually these territories, but also all over the world religiously, it's moderate Muslims that say, hey, we don't like radical Islam either. We don't want anything to do with them. And they follow the king of the north. By the way, that is a bad idea. You don't want to follow him either. Now, let's change this to a more recent map. If Libya and Ethiopia don't follow, and Egypt goes down with many countries, you're going to have to take several countries down out here in this conflict. I mean, as far as seeing things as radicalizing, Syria and Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, any of those things could radicalize very quickly. Some of them would, some of them won't. I don't know. But I just have a suggestion. If you take down several countries out there, what happens to the world economy? The United States might do okay. Especially now that the U.S. is starting to get pipelines and stuff going and all this other stuff. We could actually supply oil for ourselves. China and Europe will be in big trouble. All right? By the way, if China gets in trouble, your little trip over to Walmart might find a lot of empty shelves. Okay? Or other stores too. It's not just there. Try and buy a computer without any Chinese parts. Yeah, things get in trouble fast. Now, I realized that somehow I missed a slide. I'm going to back up to something. Not just a slide, a couple of them. I want to show you something. Here's Mecca and Medina down in here. 612, Muhammad starts having some visions and contacts, okay? And he begins to leave a movement. And by 634, he's already died, and we have a caliph Most of you don't know what a caliph is. He's a political and a religious ruler over a Muslim empire, basically, is the idea. A true caliph, when Muslims think they have a true one, he is the world leader of Islam, both politically and spiritually. And so we have caliphate here, and they send, by the way, the Pope is a religious and a political leader in the Christian world, north-south. Very similar leadership. And so you have 4 armies come up through here. One of them goes west of Jerusalem. 3 of them go to the east. They bypass Jerusalem, come up and conquer all this area in here, the Byzantine Christian defenders. Then they come back down in 637 on Jerusalem. They bypassed Jerusalem the first time because, well, if they would have stopped and fought against Jerusalem, Jerusalem would have gotten all kinds of help from up in here. They go and wipe out all the help, and then they come down to Jerusalem, and there's no help going to come. And they surround Jerusalem, and the defenders in Jerusalem realize this isn't going to go well. It would be a lot wiser to surrender than to fight this out. Said, we will surrender, but only to Omar, who's the caliph down in Mecca. And actually, he was in Medina. But there's a guy by the name of Khalid, a really good general that the Muslims had. And he says, hey, I look a little bit like Omar, and they've probably never seen Omar. Let me pretend to be Omar, and we can get this over with faster. So he tried that. Somebody recognized it was not Omar. And so they had to wait for the king of the south, the caliph, to come up from the south. And then Jerusalem fell. Just pointing out that the armies originally came from the south, and when Jerusalem falls, the king of the south came from the south. In Daniel, it's always about the direction of invasion route. And then in the Crusades, the papacy calls for the Crusades, and they come in from the north, thus setting up the north and the south. All right? During the second conflict, it said it wouldn't be like the latter because of ships from Cyprus. This is Daniel 11:31. So this is the Ottoman Empire. And so the Ottoman Turks come out of Constantinople, and they've already started the attack on Cyprus, and they bring over 300 ships in a fleet down the Cyprus. They drop off about 30,000 warriors, and then they turn west and head west because the Holy League, papal-led Christianity's put together a fleet of about 400 ships. And they're coming down, and they're headed out. And at the Battle of Lepanto, those two fleets met. The largest naval battle to that time, and for a long time after. It was such a fierce battle that the Muslim fleet was decimated. They were pretty well wiped out. But the Holy League fleet was so damaged they could not continue their mission. Their mission was to set Cyprus free and then go take Jerusalem. But they had to turn around and go back home. And their prophecy was they would be stopped by ships from Cyprus. That's exactly what happened. 1 year later, one of the Muslim leaders said, in the Battle of Lepanto, you merely shaved our beard. We lost our fleet, but we grew it back within a year. We rebuilt it, and it's better than ever. However, in losing Cyprus, you lost your arm, and you don't get it back. Pretty much true. And so that's exactly what stopped them in the second conflict from coming back in to Palestine or Israel. Now, back here in our third conflict, we have Egypt, I believe, will radicalize, but it represents radical Islam all over the world. Libya and Ethiopia. Oh, I know there's radical stuff going on in there. But did you notice that when the Libya government actually asks for air support, the U.S. gives them air support power? They don't like radical Islam. They'd really like to get rid of it because, you see, they have a lot of oil here, and Europe wants that oil. They could be doing really good if they didn't have radical Islam in there. Meanwhile, down here in Egypt, the people on the street aren't as friendly towards Europe and the U.S. as they wish to be in Libya. Why? They don't have any oil and stuff to trade. As a matter of fact, the last fully free election The Muslim Brotherhood won, and they wanted to set up the caliphate in Al-Quds. How strong is the Muslim Brotherhood there and radical Islam? Over here in the Sinai Peninsula, Christians are currently fleeing there because they're being killed in large numbers by radical Islam. Egypt is not able to control the Sinai Peninsula because of radical Islam. Not only that, but Mohammed Morsi, the elected president, was overthrown by a coup. They then said he was guilty of death for what some of his followers did, along with Mohammed Badia, who was the spiritual leader of the Brotherhood. They're both awaiting their death. They were sentenced to death in a half-day trial, along with over 300 other men, and none of their lawyers were allowed to be present in the courtroom, nor were they allowed to be present. Whoa. 300 and some people sentenced to death on the same afternoon, on the same trial, and they and their lawyers aren't allowed to be there? Somebody's afraid of something. And then that was probably a year and a half ago or whatever that they were sentenced to death. They still haven't had their death sentence carried out. Why? Because if they did, Egypt would probably explode. Because there's a lot of radical Islam out there still. And if their leaders were put to death, it could come apart. So Egypt is still a powder keg that could blow. So I'm just saying, I know that Egypt right now is supposedly an ally of the United States against radical Islamic terrorism. I'm just telling you, based on the prophecy, I think that could change. Do you know how long it takes to change in the Middle East? Not very long. Things can happen in a hurry. Now, how might all this happen? Well, we have a whole bunch of ways that it could happen. Iran and Israel could get into it, and they're threatening each other on a fairly regular basis. Iran could get in trouble down here in the Straits of Hormuz. Yeah, that happens. Close calls happen every week or every other week or something there. You could have just terrorism across Europe or anywhere, but I would suggest one of the most interesting ones and most likely is what's been going on in Syria and Iraq. Because you see, for the first time since the Ottoman Empire, we have what is claimed to be a functioning caliphate, a king of the south. Now, let's take a look at this one. July 1, the London Telegraph runs this story. Remember, we have to have a king of the south push against the king of the north, and then we enter the third and final conflict. And so, 2 days earlier, into June, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the self-proclaimed leader of the Islamic State stretching across Iraq and Syria, has vowed to lead the conquest of Rome as he called on Muslims to immigrate to his new land to fight under its banner around the globe. So day one of the existence of the Islamic Caliphate, Islamic State Caliphate, all right? They said their target was Rome. Oh, let's see. If the king of the north is papal-led Christianity in Rome, and he's targeting Rome, do you think it might be pushing against the king of the north a little bit? Day one, that's what we've got. Now just remember, a few months ago they changed their terror magazine from Dabiq to Rome. It may not be a good idea to go online and read it, because you might be opening yourself up to being watched. But hey, I go through security wearing Islam and Christianity and seminar shirts. I look in TSA agents' eyes and kind of dare them to talk to me. Because when they do, I pull out my little tract and say, here, this will explain it. In my home airport, Boise, Idaho, they know me fairly well, TSA. I was not a little while back, we found out they know us better maybe than we thought they did. We're going through, and my wife's wearing a jacket that says Islam and Christianity Prophecy Seminars on it, and the TSA agent that's checking our ID as we're going through security says, oh, you guys have DVDs, don't you? I said, have you been on our website to watch our video materials? He said, no, I've been in your luggage. By the way, they don't always remember to put that little note in there that they've been in there. We get that. I get that note almost every trip, several of them. I just love to watch their faces when they open it and see the stuff I carry. But I figure they already know about me, so I go online and read this stuff. Someday, my seminars have had military intelligence officers, FBI, State Department, TSA, Homeland Security agents all attend my seminars. And they talk to me, and boy, we get in good discussions after meetings sometimes. I remember one guy told me he was there for both professional and personal reasons. Okay, at least you're here is what I'm thinking. I get to share God's word with him. The most fun one was a military intelligence officer. And I started firing. He was asking me questions, so I started hitting back with questions. And I asked him things that I didn't think he would be able to tell me. And he looked at me and he said, I can't answer that. But I knew he had an answer, but he couldn't answer it. I knew I was dipping into what was probably classified stuff. And I asked 2 or 3 questions, and he kept saying, I can't answer that. He'd answered other things, but all of a sudden I was hitting in areas he couldn't answer. And then he looked at me and he grinned. He said, by the way, you have some good instincts. So I figured I was right in at least 1 or 2 of those 3 things I just covered, but I didn't know which ones. So it gets interesting. So we have this push, first against Rome, but also intending to take out the globe. In the next 5.5 weeks, the Islamic State expanded rapidly across Syria and Iraq, butchering thousands of people, Muslims, Yazidis, and Christians. And yes, more than anything else, they were probably killing Muslims. Because not all Muslims agreed with them. You agreed or you died. It was kind of that simple. Pope Francis appealed to world leaders. By the way, this is probably the day after the Mount Sinjar thing, where about 50,000 Yazidis were trapped up on Mount Sinjar by the Islamic State. Pope Francis appealed to world leaders on Thursday to help end the crisis in northern Iraq after a sweeping advance by radical Islamic State militants forced thousands of residents of Iraq's biggest Christian town to flee their homes. His Holiness addresses an urgent appeal to the international community to take action to end the humanitarian tragedy now underway. The question would be, was he talking about humanitarian action, or was he talking about military action? Well, the events of the next couple of days left it exceedingly clear he was calling for military action. The very next day, Obama said, America is coming to help. And within 36 hours of the Pope's call for action, the United States was bombing the Islamic State in Iraq. A few weeks later, they came into Syria and started bombing the Islamic State. But 36 hours is pretty quick after the Pope calls for action. Then, August 11, 4 days after the papal call for action, some of the press are saying, oh, surely the Pope didn't mean military action. And so papal ambassadors started clarifying, oh, they meant military action. Here's what it says. Referring to military action, Archbishop Giorgio Lingua, the Vatican's nuncio to Iraq, told Vatican Radio this is something that had to be done, otherwise the Islamic State could not be stopped. Such a call is virtually unprecedented for a papal envoy in modern times, but our age is an extraordinary one, and the Islamic State has no interest in a bargaining table. Instead, the Islamic State has been on genocide and barbarism, ruthlessly exterminating anyone who opposes them. Oh, it's unprecedented in modern times? Yeah, you got to go back to the time period of the Ottoman Empire for the papacy to be calling for military action against some form of Islam. Let's see, if that was the second conflict, and we're having a papal call for action again, we'd now be in the third. The Holy See's ambassador to the United States and United Nations, Silvano Tomasi, this weekend has supported U.S. airstrikes aimed at halting advance of Sunni Islamic State militants, calling for intervention now before it's too late. While the Vatican vocally disapproved of the U.S.-led campaign in Iraq in 2003 and the 2013 plan for airstrikes on Syria, fearing both might make the situation worse for Christians on the ground, fears of ethnic cleansing by Islamists has forced a policy change. Now, you have to know that for years I've been told by people, oh, hey, Tim, this holy war's already begun September 11, 2001. I said, no, it hasn't. because the Pope actually resisted the United States in military action after that. He did not call for it. Based on the prophecy, the third conflict doesn't happen until the Pope calls for military action. But I'll tell you, on August 7, 2014, I remember right where I was. Like many of you remember where you were on September 11, 2001. I knew where I was on August 7 because I was watching and waiting for when the Pope did this. Because I knew what the prophecy said. And folks, that's why you need to know prophecy. You don't get blindsided. And most of the world is about ready to follow the papacy when they shouldn't be doing it. Because the prophecy says that is a really bad idea. All right? Let's keep going. So what was it that forced the papacy to change? Being pushed by radical Islam. The king of the south pushes against the king of the north. And the king of the north comes out calling for war. And he's about to get it. Then, the Islamic State begins to put out slick videos of executions, beheadings, and all kinds of other stuff. Why would they do that? Doesn't they know it get the world mad and have the world come after them? That's exactly why they're doing it. You see, they believe they have to have 80 nations fighting against them before they can win. They've only got about 70 right now. They need 10 more. Then they can win, for their way of thinking. And so they're trying to do that. That's why you have all the slick videos of executions, horrific ways of doing it. Drowning people, burning people alive, beheading them. They just beheaded a Chinese guy recently. They hung him upside down, cut his head off for a video, and turned it loose for the Chinese to watch, to make sure the Chinese are mad at him. Then, notice something. This is Obama, and the Pope is currently really working hard on this one. What we've got to do is make sure that we are organizing the Arab world, the Middle East, the Muslim world, along with the international community to isolate this cancer. Remember, the prophecy says radical Islam goes down, but a whole big chunk of Islam follows papal-led Christianity. They're working exactly on what the prophecy said. Catholic Herald. Former Israeli president, in case you didn't notice, these are all in date order. You're watching the whirlwind of Daniel 11 unfold before your eyes. And I'm not even focusing on the terrorist acts. I'm looking at the really important stuff happening behind that. All right? Former Israeli President Shimon Peres has said that Pope Francis is more powerful than the United Nations when it comes to advocating peace. While visiting the Vatican earlier today, Mr. Peres asked Pope Francis to head a parallel United Nations called the United Religions to counter religious extremism in the world today. He said the United Nations and its peacekeepers do not have the force or the effectiveness of any one of the Pope's homilies, which can draw 500,000 people just in St. Peter's Square alone. So given that the United Nations has run its course, what we need is an organization of united religions, Mr. Peres said, as the best way to counteract these terrorists who kill in the name of their faith. What we need is an unquestionable moral authority who says out loud, no, God doesn't want this and doesn't allow it, he added. Whoa. Do you know your history? There's somewhere between 50 and 100 million people were killed for disagreeing with the papacy, in the Muslims, Christians, and Jews that have died for disagreeing with the papacy. And they want to put them in charge of saying don't kill in the name of your religion? It's putting the fox in charge of the hen house. But that's what the world's doing. It's turning to this guy to say, hey, we need somebody to organize behind. Hey, some of us had already put it in writing. That's exactly what was going to happen before it happened. Some people say, why do you have so much confidence in Daniel 11? Because it keeps coming true. It's never missed a detail for 2,500 years. Why wouldn't I have confidence? And some of it I put in the writing before it happened based on this prophecy. Here's the really interesting thing. Daniel 11 had not moved in over 100 years when I wrote my book. There had been no move. The next move is supposed to go like a whirlwind. King of the South pushes against the king of the North. You have military action, and then radical Islam gets wiped out. Well, since I wrote the book, King of the South, radical Islam's pushed against the papacy, and the papacy's called for war. The next step is the wiping out of radical Islam. It's happening in sequence. Well, another one. What has been declared by the self-declared Islamic State is clear. They want to kill the Pope. The threats against the Pope are credible. The Pope has made himself a target by speaking out against the human rights abuses committed against Christians in Syria and Iraq, as well as by his approval of attempts by the U.S. to try and roll back ISIL. Oh, so the Islamic State has openly called for the assassination of Pope Francis. And if you read their terror magazines, and again, for most of you, I'd encourage you not to, but if you do, you're going to find that you're going to see their black flag flying over pictures of the Vatican. They're very clear that they're going to take down the Vatican someday, and they name their terror magazine Rome. What would happen if they actually set off a large bomb in the Vatican? Or what would happen if they were successful in assassinating Pope Francis? Do you think it would lead to stability in our world? No. I would suggest we'd be in a holy war in far less than a week if that happened. Believe it or not, there's a lot of Muslims that like Francis as well. Now, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of the extremist group ISIS, called on his supporters to erupt volcanoes of jihad everywhere, light the earth with fire. And by November of 2014, they had not struck in Europe or the United States. Oh, that has changed. That has changed since then. Jihadi John, to Obama, the dog of Rome, today we are slaughtering the soldiers of Bashar, and tomorrow we'll be slaughtering your soldiers. And with Allah's permission, we will break this final and last crusade, and the Islamic State will soon, like your puppet David Cameron said, begin to slaughter your people on your streets. Oh, he calls the U.S. the dog of Rome. Remember, we already pointed out that the United States would be the military enforcer for the papacy. That was first said in the mid-1800s by somebody. It's now happening. This isn't just somebody saying, oh yeah, that's what I always said. You know, it's in print by people from a long time ago. I had it in print before it was happening. Pope Francis said that equating Islam with violence was wrong and called on Muslim leaders to issue a global condemnation of terrorism to help dispel the stereotype. You just can't say all Muslims are terrorists, just as you can't say that all Christians are fundamentalists. We have our share of them fundamentalists. All Christians have these little groups. What do you think about that? When the longer I think about it, the more problematic that one gets. Yes, radical Islam is a fringe group of Islam. No question about it. That's why so many Muslims don't like it. But he just called radical Islam fundamentalist. They also call any Christian who's going by the book instead of their traditions a fundamentalist. Think about that for a moment. He's called for the wiping out of the Muslim fundamentalist. The prophecy says that after taking down Islam, he goes after Christians that are really following the book, just like during the Inquisition, during the Reformation. You can see it coming. By the way, the Pope now says there is no Islamic terrorism. There is only terrorism. Anybody who doesn't agree is a terrorist, basically. And what did he do, the Christian fundamentalists, during the Inquisition? Burned them at the stake. By the way, how did he get so much power back then? It was following the Crusades, when the Christian world followed him because they hated Islam. Once again, you have a setup for the same thing. Conflict with Islam, then he goes after Christians who disagree with him. It's the same pattern. And I just suggest you keep your eyes open and watch for it. An alleged weapons maker for the Islamic State claimed that the radioactive device, a dirty bomb, has been smuggled into an undisclosed location in Europe, according to an intelligence brief released Monday by the Site Intelligence Group. Now, I don't really believe that one's true, because I don't think they would have sat on having a dirty bomb in Europe for the last 3 years and not used it, or 2.5 years, whatever. I think they would have tried using it already. Because if you have a dirty bomb, it's too hard to hide because it gives off radiation. However, what we do know is that the Islamic State has conquered enough industry and hospitals and such sites that they have enough radioactive materials for at least 3 or 4 nasty dirty bombs. Now, a dirty bomb is just a conventional weapon. You take a vehicle, you pack it with explosives, and then you, instead of putting ball bearings and marbles and nails and stuff like that around it, you pack it with radioactive material, you drive it into a spot and set it off. And that area where it goes off becomes radioactive and you can't really live there for a while. What do you think would happen if they tried that somewhere in Europe? That would really not go well either. What if they tried it at the Vatican, since they keep saying that's their target? I don't know, but there is some reason that the King of the North tries to move his capital from Rome to Jerusalem. By the way, if the Vatican wasn't a nice place to live and you're the Pope, where would you want to go next? Jerusalem. That's where everybody wants to go. Just a thought. We're looking at the prophecy. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it's a real possibility. Then, remember in January 2015, Charlie Hebdo attack, 17 people died. The Charlie Hebdo magazine ran some cartoons of Muhammad, and a couple of brothers took him out. And then there was a battle at a Jewish deli, and in total, 17 people died. Within 48 hours, a historic crowd of more than 1 million people, including more than 40 world leaders, jammed the streets on Sunday of Paris. Leaders often at odds, such as Ukrainian president and Russian foreign minister, they had soldiers shooting at each other on the ground in the Ukraine, but they were side by side on a parade against Islamic terrorism. Israeli Netanyahu and Palestinian Mahmoud Abbas, they were there together in that parade, leading the parade with those 40 world leaders. Over 1 million people. By the way, John Kerry, the U.S. Secretary of State, was in France and flew out right before the parade. Do you remember all the grief the Obama administration got for not having him march in the front of that parade? What was going on? Here's what's going down. The media was attacked. Charlie Hebdo. It was a media type event, right? They were a magazine, a secular magazine. And so the secular media gets all excited about it. They considered this an attack on them. And if the media is excited and a politician doesn't pay attention to what the media likes, what does the media do to him? They jump all over him. So Kerry got jumped on. I would guess he would wished he'd have stayed after the event. But if the media gets behind something, the world leaders line up. But did you know about the other terrorist attack that happened at the same time? One that probably killed over 2,000 people? Anybody remember where that one was? I bet you remember France and Charlie Hebdo. Africa. Nigeria says the number of people who lost their lives in an assault by Boko Haram militants on the town of Baga last week was no more than 150. The defense ministry said this figure included many of the terrorists who had attacked the town in Borno State and faced resistance by the troops. Local officials earlier estimated the number of deaths as many as 2,000. Nigeria has often been accused of underestimating casualty figures to downplay the threat of Boko Haram. Well, let's leave it there for a moment. I've been in northern Nigeria. I remember driving along and seeing a big billboard go by, great big guy smiling. It says, "Good luck, Jonathan." And by the way, we were traveling at a very high rate of speed, 90 to 100 miles an hour, not kilometers, on 2-lane roads with pedestrian and bicycle traffic. We're in Boko Haram territory, and they were trying to get through that area fast with 2 Americans in the car. And so in this sign flashed, and it literally flashed by. I said, "So who's Jonathan? Why are they wishing him good luck?" And they started laughing at me, the 2 Nigerians in the car. I said, "That's our president. His name is Good Luck Jonathan. His luck ran out with this one. He got voted out of office because of all the attacks by Boko Haram." Basically, every year, 2,000 to 3,000 Christians are killed in in Nigeria. All right? It can be pretty nasty. Because of radical Islam, you cannot drive down a street, the main streets, when churches are having worship services. Because they park their cars everywhere on the street so nobody can get a truck bomb in to blow them up. Because churches get blown up every once in a while. And, you see these armored personnel carriers with armored turrets with machine guns in them, where you can't even see the gunner. He's inside of armor. And they have these snow plows on the front of them. It does not snow in Abuja, the capital, where I was seeing these things. That's so you can get through a traffic jam in a hurry. It just sheds cars off both sides. That's because of radical Islam in the territory. And so, actually, the count is somewhere around 2,000 that died. That's about like September 11. Oh, by the way, the violence isn't just one-sided in Nigeria. I remember watching a mosque go flying by. Oh, my drivers could say, oh, that's a Boko Haram mosque. That one's not. That one is, as we're going through areas. I don't know how they know the difference, but these guys did. We go by one mosque. It was a really big mosque, but it was just kind of sort of there. It was blown up. And I said, so what happened to that mosque? He says, well, this city here is majority Christian, and the Christians got tired of Boko Haram, and they blew up the mosque and drove the Muslims out of town. And as we're driving along, just about within a block, we come across this big church, Our Lady of Peace Cathedral. And so I asked the drivers, do I get it right that Our Lady of Peace members chased the Muslims out of town? Yeah, they didn't get the irony of that one. Our Lady of Peace blew up the mosque. Oh, by the way, this conflict is already going, folks, in parts of the world. It was a Catholic cathedral. Then, 21 Coptic Christians were lined up on the beaches of Libya and beheaded. And one of the terrorists points his hand straight north with a bloody finger and says, we're after the nation of the cross, less than 100 miles from Italy. And they upped the guard at the Vatican. The next day, Franklin Graham said, where's the universal condemnation by Muslim leaders around the world? We'd better take this warning seriously, as these acts of terror will only spread throughout Europe and the United States. The storm is coming. I would only differ in this way. The whirlwind, the storm, had already begun when the Pope called for action. Then, the Pope drew inspiration. He speaks on it too. The Pope drew inspiration from this witness to urge Christians to work harder towards unity. I ask that we encourage one another to go forward with this ecumenism that is emboldening us, the ecumenism of blood. Now, ecumenism, the papacy and many of the Lutheran leaders are planning on celebrating the end of the protest in October, the end of October of 2017. Ecumenism, coming together. Also of blood. Oh, Christians were being killed, but he's also calling for military action against radical Islam. That's two-way bloodletting, folks. By the way, if the world comes together in one group, who would be the leader? He would. So he's calling people to follow him there, is what he's really doing. Then, they upped the guard. Now, in an unusually blunt endorsement of military action, the Vatican's top diplomat at the United Nations, this is Tomasi again, in Geneva, has called for a coordinated international force to stop the so-called Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. He said the joint statement originated with Russia, which traditionally sees itself as a protector of Orthodox Christians in the Middle East. Now, remember, the Bible says all the world's going to follow papal-led Christianity. That would mean Russia too. So I wasn't surprised when I saw this one. Notice it's Russia and the Vatican calling for an expanded coalition against the Islamic State? Radical Islam? Okay, that's right on track. Oh, the Islamic State thought it was right on track too. Remember, they were after 80 nations against them. Hey, good, we've got more coming on. Now we get Russians, allies, against us. The world acted surprised about 6 months later when Russia joined the fight in Syria. I wasn't. I know the prophecy and I know it was coming. The Pope had already called for it back in March of 2015. Then, the New York Post. This is actually, I believe, a pretty good explanation of the whirlwind-type activities that we live in and how things change in our world. These are unprecedented developments veering so far from the norm and happening so fast that consequences are piling up faster than they can be comprehended. Alliances built over decades are shattered in a relative flash, inviting aggression and endless conflict. The toxic brew of Islamic fanaticism and nuclear proliferation could ignite a world conflagration. Pretty good description of a whirlwind. Then, in the summer of 2015, a recruiting document was found from the Islamic State in Afghanistan. The extremist group has grand ambitions of building a new terrorist army in Afghanistan and Pakistan and triggering a war in India to provoke an Armageddon-like end of the world. The caliphate, according to the prophet, seeks to unite dozens of factions of the Pakistani and Afghan Taliban into a single army of terror. It includes a never-before-seen history of the Islamic State, details chilling future battle plans, urges al-Qaeda to join the group, and says the Islamic State's leader should be recognized as the sole ruler of the world's 1 billion plus, more than 1 billion, Muslims under a religious empire called a caliphate. Accept the fact that this caliphate will survive and prosper until it takes over the entire world and beheads every last person that rebels against Allah, it proclaims. This is the bitter truth. Swallow it. Remember, they're recruiting Muslims. How are they recruiting Muslims? Hey guys, you join us or we'll kill you too. Do you think that makes friends with all the Muslims? No. Nope. There's reasons that some Muslims have derogatory names for them. But by the way, in a lot of the world, you want to be careful if you're the average Muslim speaking up too loud, because you could get killed more easily than anybody else. Then, Huffington Post. But shrewdly, methodically, and with a showman's flair, the soft-spoken 78-year-old Argentinian Jesuit priest named Pope Francis showed Thursday that he is running to become president of the planet. Their title, Pope Francis wants to be president of the world, and in their article they were ready to endorse him. Oh, he showed up at the UN in this visit on Thursday. And you know what? Putin was there. Obama was there. Who got the coverage? Francis. At the time of the Crusades, the world was afraid of a radicalized version of Islam. They followed the Pope. The Ottomans, they were worried. They followed the Pope. Can you not see something happening again? This is interesting. Take a look at the title. Russia declares holy war on Islamic State while Obama sides with Christian murdering freedom fighters. It gets really messy in Syria on who you're supporting and who you're not, because they tend to change sides quite frequently. It's very fluid. The head of the external church relations, Metropolitan Ilarion, says that every 5 minutes, one Christian was dying for his or her faith in some part of the world, specifying that he was talking about such countries as Iraq, Egypt, Pakistan, and India. The cleric asked Putin to make the protection of Christians one of the foreign policy directions in the future. This is how it will be, have no doubt, Putin answered. Putin already considers himself the defender of Orthodox Christianity. Now we come to this situation, and he really does. And he's already put the joint letter into the UN. He's siding with the papacy. Then we have an immigration crisis in Europe. If you remember, less than 2 years ago, Europe was still wide open to immigration. Is it still today? No. I don't think this wave can stop, said Sonia Licht of the International Center for Democratic Transition. The global north must be prepared that the global south is on the move, the entire global south. This is not just a problem for Europe, but for the whole world. Do you remember the United States election recently? A lot of people have tried to forget, but you still can remember. There was some discussion about building a wall, wasn't there? On the southern border. It wasn't on the northern border. By the way, which border does Mexico try to defend of their borders? Southern border. The world is on the move. And the North is feeling the pressure of the South. And in Europe, you get people coming up being displaced by this terrible battles going on in Syria and Iraq and some of the repressive regimes that are in other parts of the world in the Middle East. And they're looking for freedom. How many of us wouldn't be looking for freedom? But not all of them are looking for freedom. There's also terrorists mixing in with it, making it a nasty mix. And so they're coming up into Europe. And those politicians that said the borders of Europe are wide open are rapidly getting voted out of office. France is very likely to go quite radical right in this next election. Politicians all across Europe are going down, and anti-immigration, anti-Islamic groups are gaining power. It's the way it's happening in Europe. And so, actually, when Trump said he was going to build a wall on the southern border, the Pope tweeted out a message that basically said, real Christians don't build walls. Except, the Pope lives in a walled city-state. Whoops. Some tweets are hilarious. Trump fires back, if and when the Vatican is attacked by ISIS, which as everyone knows is ISIS' ultimate trophy. Oh, if you pay half attention to what the Islamic State says they want to do, they want to take down the Vatican. So that's actually true. He goes on to say, you know, if they get worse, you're going to wish I was the president, he's telling them. Except he did become president. Then we had a nuclear summit back in April of 2016. Front and center were potential nuclear terrorist threats. Not surprising given last week, that was Brussels, attack and the terrorist surveillance of nuclear scientists and facilities. They realized that some of these terrorists have been trying to figure out how to trigger nuclear events, either through hostages or other ways. Then, Trump, on a Hannity town hall, on a news show, talking about radical Islam, he said, the point is they want to do serious harm. We have to take them out. We have to take them out very, very swiftly and viciously if necessary. We've got to destroy the brand of jihad. In Daniel 11, it says, when Egypt goes down, it goes down like a whirlwind. Swift and vicious. That's exactly what he's saying he was wanting to do. Wow. That's exactly what Daniel 11 says. By the way, God says in Daniel that he sets up and takes down leaders. That doesn't mean he allows really nice guys to always be in position. There was Nebuchadnezzar, there was Nero, there's all kinds of things. Sometimes we have nice leaders, sometimes we don't. I'm not trying to make a statement on that. I just know some people like our president, some people don't. Whichever it is, just realize God allows leadership changes. And he promises that he will use them all to fulfill his ultimate purposes, if they like it or not. The Egyptian Pharaoh didn't exactly like how God used him. However, God used him anyway. All right? Don't ever feel like this world is totally out of control. Ultimately, God still knows how to reel it in to do what he wants out of it. All right? And so, he says he's going to ultimately destroy the brand of jihad. But then he wins the election. And we have this modern Islamic scholar. He reacts to the news by saying it would be seen as a power play for terrorists across the globe, Trump's victory. When the United States uses hard power, extremists gain a momentum, he said. Those who will be the happiest when Trump wins are ISIS. They're trying to collect people to attack them. They figure they could do that fairly easily now. Okay? Then the inauguration. And in the middle of the speech, one of the most specifically foreign policy statements that he made, he didn't say much about foreign policy, but he really did here. We will reinforce old alliances and form new ones and unite the civilized world against radical Islamic terrorism, which we will eradicate completely from the face of the earth. Daniel 11 says radical Islam is wiped out. Moderate Islam follows papal-led Christianity, with the U.S. as the enforcer. He's simply saying he's going to unite the world, including moderate Islam, to wipe out radical Islam. That's exactly what I'd be expecting at some point. And some of you are thinking, yeah, but this is our time. Well, yes, somebody's going to be alive at the very end of time. Somebody's going to be alive when Jesus returns to this planet. And it looks like it may well be us. It's going to happen in somebody's lifetime. It's time to take God's word really seriously. Then they're talking about moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And you say, so? Oh, that's big. Look at this. Palestinian officials said the embassy's relocation would kill off any prospects for peace. Look what Netanyahu says in the same article. I want to make it unequivocally clear the U.S. Embassy should be here in Jerusalem. Trump said that's where he's going to put it. Do you realize there's a U.S. law that says the United States Embassy is to be moved to Jerusalem? The only thing, it's been there for years. The only thing that stops it, every 6 months, a president of the United States has to sign a presidential order to keep it from happening. Trump's kind of saying he's not going to sign it. I don't know if you've noticed something. He tries to do what he said he was going to do. Hey, do you remember the inauguration speech? If you look back over inauguration speeches, presidents are almost always smiling and happy. I never saw Trump smile once when the camera was on him. Think about this for a moment. If you knew you were about to say that you were going to call for eradicating radical Islam from the face of the earth, you better hope you have a good, strong security detail. And another thing, if you happen to own property all over the world and you call for the eradication of radical Islam all over the world, you just put a bullseye on your properties everywhere in the world. Like him or not, I will just tell you this, a coward Trump is not. But if he actually does not sign that order and has the U.S. Embassy moved to Jerusalem, radical Islam will come unhinged. Why? Remember, they want to set up their caliphate headquarters where? In Al-Quds, Jerusalem. If the U.S. reinforces that is the Israeli capital and the U.S. power is there to help it stay that way, radical Islam will go crazy. I don't know if Trump knows what he's doing. He may or may not. I don't know. But if you move the embassy there, you now have a tool to indicate who the radicals are and who those moderates are. Those who go crazy, you wipe out. Those who don't, you work with. It would be effective if that's what he wanted to do. But what I'm really watching for is the papacy moves their tents of their headquarters. It could be their capital or even possibly an embassy. For them to put it there. It's kind of interesting to see what's coming next. But friends, our world is not the same as it was 2 years ago. It's a very different place. And it's exactly what Daniel 11 said to expect. We got this right-wing fringe group. Nobody thinks that much would happen from them. But think back about 2 years ago when Trump said he was going to run for office. How many people thought he was going to win? I got somebody that thought he would win. Very few people thought he would win. All right? But I watch for statements like this because I'm expecting them to come true based on Daniel 11. So I'm going to watch this group from now on. Church Militant, a Catholic group that is militant. They don't mind encouraging military action. A fringe group claiming to be Catholic but denounced by the church broadcasts pro-life, anti-gay, anti-feminist, Islam-fearing content on its website. Its leader, Michael Voris, has compared Trump with Constantine, the Roman emperor who he says was not a moral man, but a power-hungry egomaniac, but who saw it desirable to end the persecution of Christians. He was a human vessel who elevated Catholicism to the state religion. They view Trump as a comparable to Constantine. And that's exactly what you'd expect for this prophecy to be fulfilled. So I'm going to keep an eye on that one. I'm suggesting you do too. There is that brand of Christianity that is going to become really dangerous. Now, so I've talked about the Islamic State, but it's also radical Islam. If the Islamic State goes down, by the way, where do you think all their freedom fighters are going? All over the world. And you're going to have radical terrorists all over the world that want to get even. So if you celebrate the fall of Mosul and Raqqa and places like this, just realize it's metastasizing. But Erdogan wants to become the caliph. The Brotherhood wants to set up a caliphate in Jerusalem. Al-Qaeda wants to do it. Iran wants to set up a caliphate in Jerusalem. Oh, anybody know what their special forces are called? The Quds Brigade. Why would they name their special forces after Jerusalem? The Arabic name for Jerusalem? Because they want to set up the caliphate there. Oh. So what am I telling you? Even if the Islamic State goes down, there's a whole bunch of other radicals in the area that want to do the same thing. I don't see how we're going to avoid this one. But then there's good news. I'm saving it to last. All right? Oh, by the way, Iran is on the verge of developing nuclear weapons. Do you think the world's going to be more stable once they do? No. What if they use them? They said they're going to wipe Israel off the face of the map. Do you realize Israel said they're not going to allow them to get nuclear weapons? If Israel attacks them, that could unite the radical Islamic world against Israel. By the way, that's exactly what Iran wants to trigger. Because if they're going to set up a caliphate, they need the Sunnis to help them out. And so if they can get Israel to attack them, well, they can get everybody to join with them maybe. And so they're trying to egg Israel into attacking. But by the way, there are some Sunni nations out there that aren't so sure about liking Iran. As a matter of fact, Saudi Arabia has said, hey, Israel, if you want to attack Iran, you can fly over our airspace. We won't shoot you down. El-Sisi, the president of Egypt, has said, no, Israel, if you want to attack Iran, we'll pay for your jet fuel. It's a complicated world. All right? But Iran is hoping to get the radical world to join with them. And the radical world is looking for power. And if you get a radicalized group that has a nuclear weapon, boy, that's power. But now, the good news. We've got a group, Edom, Moab, and Ammon, that escape. They're not overthrown, and they don't follow the king of the north. Take a look. Well, we hope we're going to take a look at. Hey, those screens are moving, mine's not. Let's go back. Oh, that one just caught up. Okay. How do computers do this stuff? Anyway, Daniel 11:41. These shall escape from his hand, Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. Then, in Daniel 12:1, a few verses later, and it says, at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book. Here's the interesting thing here. The word escape and the word delivered are the same word in Hebrew. So you should expect that these people that escape are somehow linked with this group that's delivered. But those people that are delivered are part of the book. Their names are written in the book. You go to Revelation, you find the book. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life when they see the beast. In Revelation, everybody's either following papal-led Christianity, the beast, or they're in the Lamb's book of life. In Daniel, Edom, Moab, and Ammon do not follow the king of the north, which means they have to be in the book. Those are the ones delivered by God. What am I saying? We're looking at a group within Islam that follows God. And I'm going to show you we have a group within Christianity that truly follow God. King of the south, king of the north, they're not. So I say it's not a good idea for moderate Muslims to follow papal-led Christianity. You follow God in His Word, no counterfeit. Now, what we have in 1 Thessalonians, and they shall not escape, but you, brethren, are not in darkness that this day should overtake you as a thief. Only those truly following God escape. Edom, Moab, and Ammon escape. In Hebrews, how shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation, which at first began to be spoken by the Lord and was confirmed to us by those who heard Him? You escape by trusting in Jesus. Now, this gets interesting to me. Edom, Moab, and Ammon. This is the Davidic kingdom. And if you look at it, it's this dark area, and there's the border of it. Did you notice that Edom, Moab, and Ammon were part of David's kingdom? Edom, Moab, and Ammon. If Jesus restores the Davidic kingdom, that means Edom, Moab, and Ammon would be a part of it. Also remember this. In Daniel, everything is geopolitical and spiritual. We have Israel and we have Jordan side by side. That is a friendly border between Israel and Jordan. I like friendly borders in this world. All right? But remember, the geopolitical has a spiritual counterpart. We have God's people. Everyone who's following God are called as Israel all over the world. You have a group of Muslims that are a part of God's people, side by side in the Davidic kingdom. The geopolitical and the spiritual, there's a friendly border there. Daniel never misses geopolitical and spiritual. It's always there. I have never found an exception. Well, look at the prophecy. This is Amos 9. It's repeated in Acts 15. On that day I will raise up the tabernacle of David, which has fallen down, and repair its damages, and rebuild it as in the days of old, that they may possess the remnant of Edom and the Gentiles who are called by my name. Oh, when Jesus restores the Davidic kingdom, it's going to include Gentiles, and He specifically names Edom. And it's Edom, Moab, and Ammon that escape. They're a part of God's kingdom. That's interesting. Joel 2:28. And it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams. Your young men shall see visions before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord. And it shall come to pass that whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there shall be deliverance. Okay, folks, I'm going to take a bit of time and explain this one. It's telling us in God's Word that just before Jesus sets up His kingdom, there's going to be a bunch of dream and vision activity for young men and young women and old men. Sorry, old ladies, it didn't mention you. It did get young ladies in there, okay? I think God can give it to anybody. It just happened to mention it that way. But all over the world, there are Muslims that are having dreams and visions of a guy by the name of Isa the Righteous One. You would know him as Jesus Christ. And he comes to them and he tells them, in many of these visions that I'm aware of, and I've talked to many people who have had them, that he tells them they should be followers of the book. You see, in the Quran, it says there are true people of the book that should be respected. It tells them that he has died for their sins. He tells them that he's coming back again as their judge and their king. It's interesting. like I said, I've talked to many of them. When I was in Nigeria, I remember talking to a group of 10 of them at one time. I know of a pastor. He was in a Muslim country where it is illegal to baptize a Muslim. As a matter of fact, if you were to baptize a Muslim, both the Muslim and you would be killed. Unfortunately, there are nations like that. And he gets what I call a good news, bad news phone call. He gets a call from a Muslim that says, I would like to be baptized. Good, and it's bad. You could die for this one. So he talks to the guy for a little bit, and he's praying about it, and he decides to meet with the man. He goes and he knocks on the door, and the door opens, and there stands the imam. Uh-oh, I might be in trouble. And the imam says, oh, please come in. I've got a group of men waiting for you in the back. He says, oh, boy, am I in trouble. He goes in, and when he's in there, he finds he's face to face with a whole group of imams. And he's told to sit down. Figures he probably should. And this imam that has invited him to his house begins to tell him about a series of dreams that he's had. He's met Isa, the righteous one, in these dreams or visions. He's been reading the Bible, and in these dreams, he's been pointed to things in the Bible, the book. And he says, I've been told that I need to be baptized, and I've called for you to baptize me, but I'd like to be baptized secretly. And this pastor's thinking, huh? How can I baptize you secretly, and you're telling me this in front of a group of imams? He says, well, I've told my friends here about it, and actually we'd all like to be baptized, but secretly. Why? Well, number one, you could get killed. But number two, you have to understand something. For most Muslims, they don't want to be a Christian. Because Christians are crusaders that kill. They're immoral in many times in history. They don't want to be a Christian. They like Jesus, but they don't like Christians. So what did they want to be? They wanted to be followers of Isa and followers of the book. They believe in Jesus as their Savior. They believe in Him as their coming King and their Judge. They believe in following the book, the Bible. They're my brothers and sisters, spiritually. They're willing to die for Isa. They just don't want to be called crusaders and be misunderstood. Because for most Muslims, Christians aren't following the book. And there's a whole bunch of legitimate reasons they believe that. And so they don't have a church. They have the house of prayer. So what name you call it? I don't know if you realize what I'm sharing. We are about to hit the most wonderful time in history. Radical Islam goes down. Moderate Islam follows papal-led Christianity. They're pretending to be Christians. And for a little bit, there's going to be I'm going to show you tomorrow in particular how this is true. There's a group of Christians and a group of Muslims that come together and follow God and His Word as it reads, not the traditions. And they're going to follow it as it reads, and together they're going to give the last warnings to the world, and there won't be any radical Muslims that kill people that are following, and moderate Islam's going to be pretending to be Christian, but they're not really, and most Christians aren't really Christian, but for a moment, we're going to have wide open opportunity to share the true message of God. It's going to be fabulous. And there are Christians who are looking at the violence and the bad stuff in Christianity and say, we're not interested in this anymore. A lot of millennials are ticked off at what's going on in the name of religion. I've had Muslims that hop on the elevator with me I'm in Chicago. I get on and a Muslim comes running in. He gets in, holds the elevator, gets in. What floor do you want to get to? He pushes the button. He turns around. He starts firing questions at me, holds the door of the elevator when my wife and I get off. He gets in and I see him press floor 1. He only hopped on to ask questions. He doesn't like what's happening in Islam, but he doesn't like Christianity. What is this Islam and Christianity thing? And I get to share some good news. The world is getting tired of the garbage, folks. You see, there are some Christians who believe we should be following the Bible. During the Inquisition, they were burned at the stake by organized Christianity. You see, organized Christianity hasn't always believed in following the book. There are some Muslims who are no longer interested in following what they see going on in the garbage. They don't like what they see in Christianity. But they do know there are true people of the book, and they'd like to be a part of that. This could get interesting. And guess what happens to those Muslims who are wanting to follow the book? Radical Islam doesn't like them. Those Christians who are following the book, people-led Christianity doesn't like them. There's a history on both of these. Where are they going to get caught? No matter where they are, they get caught in the middle. Oh, now you have a better picture of your world. Now, some of you may not be sure about all this. I'm just telling you, here's the prophecy. It's been predicted 2,500 years ago, and in our days, it's happening in the order as being presented. It's never missed a detail for 2,500 years. I'd suggest you take it seriously. For the rest of you, you kind of interested, maybe very interested, guess what? You're never going to be able to watch the news again the same. Because you've seen something in God's Word. And I'm okay with that. Really okay with that. Now, where do we go from here? Some people are asking me, hey, what should a Christian do in this thing? What does a real follower of the book do? Both radical Islam and papal-led Christianity aren't God's side. So what do you do with radical Islam? They're out there killing people. Well, in Romans 12 and 13, it tells us that we are to respect those who carry the sword, meaning military police kind of thing, all right? Because they are God's ministers. The government and individuals in God's Word are given the right of self-defense. But when Jesus was here, he told us there's a better way. That's to turn the other cheek. I respect those who risk all to give us peace. However, here's a question. I can't find, or can you show me, anywhere in the Bible where God asked his followers to join the sword carriers? He said we should respect them, that God is using them. But God was using Pharaoh too. That we should respect them. And I really do. By the way, I'm not saying they're bad guys. Good news is, God knows each person's heart. But there's a really scary thing going on in the world right now. If we have North and South in conflict and God's people get caught in the middle, if you're in the military, you're likely to become a religious and political pawn. And that's a scary thought. Pray for our world leaders. Pray for soldiers, police officers, and all the rest of them. They especially need God to guide them, and they get into some really tough, nasty situations. My heart goes out to them. But I can't find anywhere in the Bible where it tells me to join the sword carriers. As a matter of fact, for the first 200 years of Christianity, Christians died for Jesus. They would not kill for Jesus. Actually, they wouldn't even kill in self-defense. And Christianity exploded across the face of the earth. Constantine came in and they started killing for Christianity, and Christianity lost its power and it spread across the face of the earth. It doesn't work so well when you say, hey, you either need to convert or we're going to kill you. Radical Islam's finding out the same. Now, they'll convert as long as they're there, but as soon as they're gone, they've changed back to what they want to be. You don't change hearts with threats. You change hearts by willing to die for what you believe. And what we need today are Christians who are willing to get caught in the middle and die for Jesus Christ. Die for God's word. That's what we need today. So we have papal-led Christianity. It overthrows radical Islam. Papal and moderate Islam follows them. That leaves papal-led Christianity in control of what happens next. And it's very interesting. From this point on in Daniel 11, it takes more of a spiritual twist because it's less of a geopolitical conflict now than a spiritual conflict, and so it goes more spiritual. And what it does, it counteracts one counterfeit teaching of papal-led Christianity after another to put in its place the teachings of God's Word, the true book. And if you have the courage to find out where that prophecy goes, what's the aftermath, I encourage you to keep coming. There is so much here, I have to slow down. For the last 4 or 5 verses, it's going to take us, 5 verses will take us 5 days. Remember for night 1, we went through 21 verses? Now we're going to take 5 verses in 5 days. It's so full of stuff. And we're going to unpack that as we go. All right. So, our next presentation is Tidings from the East and the Mark of the Beast. By the way, Edom, Moab, and Ammon are to the east. Should be good stuff. Those are the people that escape. Let's take a look at that one tomorrow night. And by the way, on Thursday evening, I'm going to have a question and answer session after the second session. So at 8:30 Thursday night, we'll take up to half an hour for question and answers. If you want to write out a question on the back of your quiz envelope or offering envelope, whatever you want to call it, response envelope, I'm going to start with the written questions. After that, I'll take hands. All right? So, statement 1, put a number 5 up there for seminar number 5. Islam is the king of the south in Daniel 11 because it came from the southern part of the Roman Empire, invaded Israel from the south, and has fulfilled all aspects of the prophecies so far. Yes, no, or question mark? Oh, wow, I went longer than I thought. Number 2, I told you I wasn't going to look at a clock. I just did. Number 2, both the king of the north and the king of the south have persecuted God's people of faith. Have there been groups of Muslims or groups of Christians that have persecuted God's true followers? Yes, no, or question mark, or some other kind of statement. Number 3, radical Islam as Egypt will be overthrown, while moderate Islam, Libya, will follow after papal-led Christianity, the king of the north. Yes, no, or question mark. Number 4, God has a people who will truly follow Jesus in the Bible. God is calling his people out from both Christianity and Islam to that group in the middle. No, yes, no, or question mark. Number 5, I will follow Jesus and what the Bible teaches. Boy, that is my bottom line. I told you that on night 1, and I'm going to keep hammering on it. That is exactly it. Are you ready to be caught in the middle and follow God's word instead of traditions of people from any direction? Always God's word. And that's what I hope everybody says yes to. And so again, written questions first on Thursday night, then verbal ones if there's time left over. Let's close with prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I do thank you for your word. And Lord, in a crazy world that we're being taught hate, help us to love people even if they don't love us, just like Jesus told us to do. And so, Lord, I ask that you would send your Spirit to lead and guide each person as they think about this. Take us each to your word, to your book, the Bible, and help us to be true to it. In Jesus' name, amen. By the way, we do have materials out there. We've got a book. And one of the most useful things out there, not just the DVDs and stuff, is this little track. I always carry some in my pocket. When people want to know what about the conflict about Islam and Christianity, where's the world headed to, I just pull this little one out and I give it to them. It's also got our website where they can watch video and stuff on it. I'd suggest you take a look at it. You might want to start carrying those in your pocket. Leave them when you get tips and stuff like that. Give tips and things like that along the line. God bless. I'm going to be out in the foyer if you have a question.